Hi, friends. Before we get into the show, we wanted to ask that you rate, review, and subscribe to The Breakout. It's quick, it's super easy, and it's a really important way to help people find us and get to hear these inspirational stories. We really appreciate it.
I often say that creativity is rooted in refusal, that you refuse to accept that the world as it is just fine as it is, because you recognize that the world as it is can be altered.
Dr. Tasha Golden wants everyone to see the extraordinary power in creativity. Tasha is a behavioral scientist and a leading expert in how creativity drives transformative change. And she should know, because before she found this fascinating career of hers, Tasha was a highly successful singer and songwriter touring the world until a shattering case of burnout forced her to change everything.
Here's the only job I've ever wanted, and I know I can't keep doing it. And it was the most devastating realization of my life. In order to live, basically, I had to reimagine who I was.
In this episode, Tasha shares how that act of reimagination led her to the work she does now, using creativity and the arts to help organizations innovate, grow, and find new ways to solve old problems. She explains how integrating the arts into things like healthcare and even the judicial system can make a profound impact on everyone's lives. Sometimes big change means reimagining everything, and Tasha is here for it. And so are we. Welcome to The Breakout, a show about smashing through life's little boxes and forging your own path. I'm Dr. Carrie Ulrich.
And I'm Kelly Gunther. Carrie and I are people and change experts, best friends, and business partners. We've spent more than 25 years helping employees and leaders change. With love and a lot of laughs, we're here to empower you to live life on your terms. Our methods may seem a bit unconventional, but trust us, they will change your life.
Let's be real for a second. We know change can sometimes be scary. Heck, it even scares us. But staying the same can be even scarier. On The Breakout, we prove that you can escape expectations. And best of all, we show you how. Dr. Tasha Golden, we are so excited you're here to talk to us. And we also love that you're in the business of change and transformation, and you really approach it in a unique way. So, what do you help people break out of, and how do you do that?
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all. I help people, whether individuals or organizations, corporations, to break out of the status quo, their norms, their narratives that they've been handed about how their lives have to work or how their role or job or industry has to work. It's about breaking out of a sense of like, this is just how it is, and applying a creative mindset so that we can grow and find new opportunities, bolster our well-being. And I do that by combining creative practice with science, like behavioral science, health sciences. We know from the science that creativity, the arts, aesthetics can change how we think, what we perceive, how we feel, our health. It can change how we interact, the stories we tell. So I help people to basically apply that science, taking up creativity as not only an experience or an activity, but as a way of seeing themselves in the world and responding to it.
I can't wait to get more into the not only breaking the status quo, which we'd love to talk about, fuck that status quo, but before you became a behavioral scientist and a researcher, you were a musician for so many years. Tell us about that.
Yes, this work in the sciences was not the plan. I had no sense that I would eventually be talking to people about science for any reason. From the time I was a really little girl, I wanted to write songs and travel around the world and play them. And I got to do that for a lot of years, worked with some really amazing artists, Grammy-winning producers, had songs in TV shows and films. And in the process, though, for me, when I was first writing songs from the time I was really young, it was a way to process and share things that I couldn't talk about otherwise. And once I was out on the road, meeting different audiences night after night, I saw that there was a similar thing happening for the audience, that they were finding something in the songs that allowed them to think things and share things that they weren't thinking or sharing otherwise. And, I had songs about my own experiences of depression or my family's history of domestic violence. And wherever we traveled in the world, from Nashville to Beijing, those were the songs that people stayed after concerts wanting to talk about. And they would share their own personal experiences with those kinds of things, and often tell me that I was the first person they had ever told. And I was so honored by that and saw the power of the arts and creativity in that. But it also made me really aware of what's happening in this space isn't just something that's entertaining. It's not just something that feels good right now. It is changing what we think and how we think. It's changing something about what we feel safe to share. It's doing this really heavy psychological and social emotional work. And what are the implications of that for our other spaces, like the places where we don't feel comfortable sharing a story, disclosing something about our life experiences, whether that's a doctor's office or, at home with a loved one? What are the implications for the power of the arts if we take it outside of the places where we expect to see it? I was just musing on that question all the time. I didn't think that it was going to shape my career trajectory, but, it definitely did. The breakout I wasn't planning.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because when you're talking about it, Tasha, when you think of songs, it evokes so much emotion. And so this makes sense that people were connecting with you. But then when did the career switch happen?
There's two things. The music industry is kind of notorious for being hard on people's mental health. The unpredictability of the music industry, the kind of grind and hustle of it wound up wearing me down. And I will say also, I was trying to hold space night after night for people's really difficult and intimate stories. And I was doing the best that I could with that. I didn't necessarily realize in that time that I didn't know how to do that while also taking care of myself, while also holding space for my own mental health. So, which is all to say that I wound up in the midst of severe burnout and major depression. I couldn't get out of bed for weeks, let alone play concerts. And so the career transition was really a matter of survival. When I was laying in bed, I felt like, okay, here's the only job I've ever wanted. And I know I can't keep doing it. And it was the most devastating realization of my life. In order to live, basically, I had to reimagine who I was. What is it that I'm on the planet to do? During that really difficult and dark time, I was pulling on the threads of those questions until I wound up with a PhD in public health, specializing in how is it that music and the arts more generally, culture and creativity more generally, affect our brains and bodies and behaviors, not only as individuals, but as collectives, as populations, systems.
Yeah. Tasha, as you were sitting and not being able to get out of the bed, and you're like, I am burned out, I am depressed, how did you start to tease out, this is what I want to plan to do, and this is how I'm going to get out of bed? Because I think that's where people get so stuck.
At the time, I don't think that I could have articulated it this way, but from my experience since then and the research, I can look back and see that, as somebody who had been a creative and an artist for my whole life, I had a bit kind of built in intuitively of what I now refer to as a creative mindset. And I often say that creativity is rooted in refusal, that you refuse to accept that the world as it is just fine as it is. Even the creative act of writing a song or creating a sculpture or writing a poem, those are acts of creation, but they're also acts of refusal because, you recognize that the world as it is can be altered, can be influenced. And so I think in that really dark moment for me, I was experiencing something that I found devastating. And for me, it felt like a beginning, like this is the moment of refusal. I hate this, but that's where creativity begins. You have to refuse to accept that how it's been or how it is how it has to stay. And it took me several years to figure out, a kind of version of what I'm doing right now, because there were so many different pathways that you could go down. Yeah. And I did find that very frustrating, especially as somebody who had a singular goal my whole life, which was to go into the music industry. But I did have that sense that refusal leads to something. And the recognition, it's not great that I had to come to that refusal via a crisis. I now help people to realize that you can refuse the life that you're in before you reach crisis point. There's always an invitation to do that. But yeah, the refusal and the very feeling of being stuck is a signal that you're at the beginning of something.
I want to steal that so much, that refusal, because that's really what it is. I'm refusing to kind of fit into that box. How do you listen to that? And how do you realize I'm stuck and I want to do something? And that's that creative piece. And just thank you for that. So how do you now apply this in your everyday work?
There are 1,000 different ways. This is part of what's fun about being involved in public health, which can be like everything, and the arts, which can also be like everything. It's like two massive universes meeting one another, right? We can start by getting a little bit philosophical. Like there's some processes that we walk through as creatives that can help us envision what we're doing. And then also, I always like to take a step back and just, say that we evolved to make and share art for a reason. Like if this wasn't essential to our survival in some way, we would have stopped doing it millennia ago. So we don't have to know all of the really specific reasons why it's essential to us to be able to appreciate that this must be doing something for our brains, for our bodies, for our survival, for our sociality, the ways that we connect and don't, the ways that we share, communicate, etc. So we can start way back there and just kind of appreciate like, oh, this must play a role. And sometimes that gives us a little bit of permission to explore what that might mean for our lives. A lot of times what that comes down to is, okay, what is it that gives you a spark of curiosity? What are the things that you enjoy? Basically, how do you define well-being? What would make a life worth living? And I get to ask questions like that all over the world. And the questions always come back to things that could fall under the umbrella of arts and culture, the things that give our lives meaning, purpose, a sense of belonging or being part of something bigger than ourselves. And I'll also say, I've been doing a lot of research the last few years on arts on prescription, this model of care. It's also called social prescribing in the arts. It's exactly what it sounds like. Like right now, all over the world, but also in the US, there are physicians and therapists, social workers, school counselors who are prescribing experiences in arts and culture and nature to benefit their students' health, their clients' health, their patients' health. If some people are being prescribed a live music concert or a trip to the museum, what is it that is in my life? What do I do that kind of gives me something like that? Do I love to read novels? Do I love to go to my local park? What are the things that I'm doing in my life and why am I doing them? How are they benefiting my health? And again, we get a little bit of that sense of permission. Maybe it's good for me to spend some time doing these kinds of things. And then the second key thing that I've seen arts and prescription sort of move the needle on is this idea that it is possible to reimagine even our most complex systems. That when you start thinking of a physician, like a pediatrician or a psychiatrist prescribing tickets to a play or something like that, you have to recognize that healthcare can be different than any of us have typically imagined it being. And, you have to reimagine health itself, that health itself might be defined differently than we thought.
Yeah.
And how it's created and where it's created may be different than we thought. And who's involved in the process may be very different than we thought. And that example of reimagining something as complex as healthcare in the US gives me a lot of hope for what else we can reimagine.
We'll get back to the interview after this quick break.
On the Breakout, Carrie and I celebrate big changes and small shifts. Only about 10% of us are really self-aware, but 90% of us think we are. Without self-awareness, change is tough. And if you don't know what box you're in, you can't break out of it. That's where we come in.
We are coaches and consultants that help you dig into change. We've spent our lives breaking through expectations, and we've devoted our careers to showing people how to do the same. We're here to help you demolish the story you've built around yourself to reveal the true you. Then the real fun begins.
And by fun, we mean helping you figure out your why and taking action to forge a fresh path. Connect with us at abrochigroup.com.
Another project that you worked on is in your early years doing this was called Project Uncaged. So can you tell us about that and what you learned?
Yeah, Project Uncaged is a trauma-informed creative writing program for girls that are incarcerated. I just did a deep dive into research around girls in the justice system, found out a lot of things about gender inequities in the system. And a lot of times there are no programs for girls. They will have multiple programs for boys, but literally nothing for girls in some facilities. They still do operate on that gender binary. So that's why I'm using that kind of language. But, and often that's because they will have a larger population of boys and maybe only a few girls at any given time. And those girls are coming in and out. And so they haven't found a way to establish a program. But for me, I'm just thinking, this is not equitable. They should have just as many opportunities that are just as effective for them as the boys have. I did a lot of work around both how do you develop something that's trauma-informed for these young people, because there's a high level of trauma history among these young people. So how do we develop an arts-based program that's trauma-informed? But then I also wanted to explore how do we amplify their voices so that their needs are heard, but not only their needs, but their power and their strengths and their talent can be seen and heard. And I wound up, establishing my own program. And my program has always had this emphasis on not only providing a kind of experience for girls in the moment where they can express themselves and be whoever they are. Anything is welcome here. You can say whatever you want. You can write whatever you want. But also we publish books of their poems with their permission, of course. And always asking them, where do you want your poems to go? Who do you think should read this? And it's usually the decision makers in their lives. It'll be like the mayor, state legislators, judges, wardens, probation officers, right? And so once those books were published, we started sending them to the people that girls named, along with, policy briefs or advisory briefs around here's what girls have brought up in their poems in this book. Here's what you could do in your position to respond to them. And using the power of the arts to not only have that initial impact on their mental health, their stress levels, their group cohesion, their sense of being able to talk to one another, but also that longer term effect that, we can have when we allow them to speak to their own experience in their words, on their terms, and say, here's what I need, here's what should be different. This is what would allow me to be successful or to be healthy. I often say that those girls have been among my greatest teachers, and that continues to be true.
Yeah. What is one of the, if you think of maybe the top couple just moments or lessons that you've learned from them, what would you say?
First, it's just the recognition that no matter how old somebody is, or no matter what circumstances they're in, they are the experts in their lived experience, and they know far more about what they need than we tend to give them credit for. There's a lot of adultism, there's a tendency to either try to be a savior for young people or to just treat them as if they're just adults in waiting or something like that, and not honor their experience as it is right now. Why are young people experiencing this and that? Ask them. That's been the priority in my public health research since then, is that their voices have to lead, and they have the most powerful things to say. I remember talking with this young woman one day. She was just saying that she hated coming back to jail over and over again, and she wished she didn't have to be there. And she knew that I worked on justice reform and resources for youth. And so I asked her, what do you think would have to change for you to not come back here ever again? Mm-hmm. And she thought about it for a minute and then kind of fell and put her arms out and said, Miss Tasha, you'd have to change everything. Mm. She said, you'd have to change my family, the street I live on, the school I go to, my friends, everything. It wasn't the answer that I thought that I was looking for, although I realized I didn't know what I was looking for from her, but it was such an honest answer. And it was also so much in keeping with all of my research, especially in public health, that our well-being and our ability to thrive and our ability to break out of difficult situations, to the point of your podcast, is determined and affected by our context and by the worlds that we're in. And as much beautiful work as any of us can do individually to change how we think, to change what we imagine, how we interact, we also get to demand of the world that it be different. And she really was instrumental in kind of underlining and confirming my commitment to not only help individuals to reimagine their lives and to have a creative mindset toward, where am I stuck? What am I accepting as a given that might actually be changeable? But also, how do we do that with our systems and with the world? How do all of us collectively come together and say, no, this is a story that we've been told, and we don't have to accept it, and our policies can change, our systems can change. Yeah, I hear her voice in my head a lot.
Oh my gosh. That is like just tears down my face on that one. Everything. Oh my goodness, Tasha. And again, just your spirit of, sure, let's try that, and saying yes before you really know what you're going to do. I love that. And look at that, saying yes and being open changed your life, changes other people's lives in ways you never ever thought of. So Kelly, I don't want to keep crying. So I need to toss it to you, Kelly. Get a Kleenex.
I think it just speaks so much to, again, why we do this show is because everyone's at a different place in their life, and to be able to have an outlet, Tasha, that you provide. And I love that you didn't necessarily know what you were going to find as a result of this journey, and the profound healing and the change impacts that this work that you're doing has, and that has come through the artistic work. What does the science say behind the outcomes themselves?
So from the science, we know that the arts can affect, I usually talk about it in 4 different ways. They can affect us with direct health benefits. They can shorten healing times. We know that people in hospitals that have views of painting or art or even of nature and the outdoors have shorter healing times and do better with their outcomes there, have higher patient satisfaction ratings, things like that. We know that people with Parkinson's disease can often dance without shaking, even if they can't walk. And so it can affect mobility and just improve quality of life. We see it very often as ways to connect. We have a loneliness epidemic right now. And what are the things that humans have done throughout the centuries that connects them with each other? Usually these are things that revolve around arts, culture, rituals, things like that. So really beautiful science and studies around this kind of like direct individual and group ways that like an experience of the arts can help us feel better. It can also, your heartbeats can get entrained with other people that you're with. It can lower your stress levels, cortisol levels, lots of things like that. So that's the first one. The second one that I often talk about is art can change what people disclose, what they think about, what they share. And that means it changes what we know about people, what we know about our communities. And so art can be really essential as ways to learn about what's going on with a given experience. And some of us, have our own stories of that there might be an experience or a condition that we never paid attention to or didn't know about until we watched a movie and a character was dealing with that. And then suddenly we understand that situation. So there's this individual and immediate benefits. There's data. There's also education and awareness. This is pretty intuitive for lots of people that, when we hear things via the arts, it's usually more memorable and more shareable than if we just get a lecture, or again, if we just hear like a political soundbite or a statistic or something like that. So the things that we learn via the arts kind of like sink in a different way. And then the last one is sociopolitical change. We know that artists have been at the forefront of social movements forever. And it's in part because they can generate and sustain collective action.
Incredible. What you've done is you've done some really heavy lifting in terms of understanding it so that it can be palpable, and you can create an opportunity for people to see a pathway that maybe they couldn't see for themselves to begin with. I just think that so much of what you've done is really flip the script, if you will, on what traditional healing can look like. So it's incredible. What comes up for you when you think about that?
I think what does give me hope is the sense that that I'm not able to shake because I think I can't unknow it, is that things are always changing and therefore always changeable. And what gives me hope about the work that I've seen is that it's so clear that whatever is right now is one iteration of what is possible. And sometimes each one of us as individuals doesn't have the power to wave a wand and change something that's affecting our lives. But collectively, this is how we've always done it. That somebody has to decide that this is not the way that it has to be. And then oftentimes, collectively, we come together and we make a change that needs to be made. And so, I often think about James Baldwin. He said, "The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in." And I think that's one of the highest callings that any of us has, as whether you're an artist or an activist or a leader in your company or an entrepreneur or a human being living your life, trying to, have a life that is meaningful to you and meaningful to others. That's such a high calling to recognize that here is the world, and it in a lot of ways is awful, and in a lot of ways is really beautiful. But whatever it is, it's not this because it must be. It's only what it is. And that's a big value of creativity, not only its ability to help us heal and feel better, now in our moment, but its ability to change how we think. We know that when we put ourselves in a new situation, or we have a different sensory experience or aesthetic experience, or we just learn something that's brand new to us, whatever the case may be, it changes our brains. It helps us to think something that we wouldn't have thought before and perceive our situation in a new way. That is what all of us need, both individually and collectively, is an ability to imagine.
I'm not a creative. I'm not an artistic person. I'm sure you've heard that too in the work you've done. In terms of what the arts can do for me and how I can maybe approach it if I'm skeptical myself about my creativity. And how do you respond to those folks who struggle thinking that?
I might begin by challenging the definition of creativity or being creative or an artist, because I think a lot of times people hear about creativity in the art and they're like, well, I have to make something. And if I am not a maker of something artistic, then I am not myself creative or artistic. But that experience of witnessing art and being part of it and absorbing it is also a really creative process. And it's not fully passive. A lot of times people in the research will talk about this, comparing like active arts creation to passive arts consumption or things like that. And I'm always kind of challenging that, because, what's really passive to one person might be incredibly engaged. You can go to a live music concert and look at the crowd and see that. There are some people who are just as actively involved in that concert as the person on the stage. They are just like, they're having their own experience. So what you think it might mean to be a creative person or to love the arts or to get benefits from the arts might be something different than you thought. But then also, I can say that from the science, we know that you don't have to be good at art in order to get its stress relieving benefits or its expressive benefits, to be able to find, I'm able to say something through this shitty poem that I wrote that I wouldn't have said otherwise. Great, right? It doesn't have to be a beautiful publishable poem for you to get the benefits that the arts offers. And the last thing that I would say is that even if you, quote unquote, use the arts or creativity instrumentally, that, like I said, when we do something new, we find that we're thinking different things, we're feeling different things, we feel different in our bodies. And you can know that when you're doing that, something's happening in your brain that might change your perspective.
So certainly not a one-size-fits-all solution is what I'm hearing, Tasha. There isn't like a magic pill like everyone is sometimes looking for, but it's very individualistic, and it's helping you, I would imagine, create some self-awareness too about what does motivate you, what are you curious by. It does kind of challenge you to learn about yourself in different ways and figure out what makes you sort of tick. So I can imagine that it's in a very empowering exercise to be able to help people see and think about the possibilities of what that could look like for them.
Absolutely. Yes. Like definitely no one size fits all. And we've seen that even with the formal like arts on prescription schemas, where rather than saying like anybody who comes in and has depression is going to get prescribed this experience, we've seen that the most positive outcomes come when there's an element of choice and agency, when people can say like, not only, maybe my symptoms indicate that I could benefit from an arts-based experience, but then it's going to be important to ask me what I'm interested in, what makes me curious, what lights me up. And that's why, it's so clear that our well-being, but also our imaginations and our creativity as individuals and as collectives is something that we can nurture as full communities.
Last question for you, Tasha. You have 1 minute with someone who is stuck and they want to break out. What do you tell them?
I think I might go back to what I said earlier, which is that this moment that you're in can be a beginning. If we can be open enough to just experiment with what it would feel like, to be like, okay, what if this isn't the crash at the end of something, but the difficult experience of like, blooming out of the ground, the spring that's coming after a really difficult winter. If I saw it that way, what might change? And I'd also say that our ability to imagine that things could be otherwise is part of what helps us all to tell ourselves the truth about how things are. We feel safer to tell ourselves the truth about who we are and how we feel and what we're doing when we don't think that we're stuck with how it is. And so any help that you can get with that reimagination process, you don't have to do that on your own. You might need somebody else's brain to come in and be like, what if you saw it this way? And sometimes when we're having the hardest times, we want somebody to listen to us and just be like, yeah, exactly. What you feel that's totally real. And I agree. And I have all this empathy. And that's so important. We all need that. But also it can be very helpful to have somebody who hopefully is still very empathetic, but is like, I actually see this really differently than you do, because that's where we get the spark of the possibility that maybe there's a door open somewhere. We just have to find it.
And it's to your point, it's about agency, it's about having choice, and it's about finding people that can nurture that part of you and offer you some different ways of thinking. And it's important to reach out to those people and let them know what you're looking for from them so that they can be that resource for you. It's just incredible the work that you've done, Dr. Tasha Golden. We're just so grateful to you for sharing your story and for being on our podcast.
Dr. Tasha Golden, I'm thinking you embody the term spark of possibility. You are the spark of possibility.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been good to be here, and thank you for the work you do to help people find ways out. It's so important.
What I really appreciated about Tasha was, one, that she saw different parts that most people wouldn't see that you could put together. So she infused arts into public health. What? That's amazing. So she breaks out of one thing and then infuses it into another. And I think her message of it's a beginning, which is, as she said, very tough to hear when you think something's an ending. But it is truly a beginning. And her frame on looking at it is inspirational. And as she said, when she was in it, she certainly didn't think that. And so how can she help others who are in it realize that you don't have to be stuck in it? And that's what I loved.
She set out on a path, but she didn't know what it was going to look like. And
Exactly.
I think that's her own personal curiosity, her own commitment to the work, and, for her to have the tenacity and realize that it's really truly about the individual. And only you know your experience. You are the expert in your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
That was Dr. Tasha Golden, creative change agent, and this is The Breakout.
Kelly and I are in the business of breaking free, being brave, and living boldly. We're here to inspire you to be the badass you are meant to be. Coaching and consulting is kind of our thing, and we're really good at it. Connect with us at abrachigroup.com.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Breakout so you never miss a new episode. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And please leave us a review. Reviews help more people find the show, connect with us, and live a more authentic life. I'm Kelly Gunther.
And I'm Dr. Carrie Ulrich. See you next time.